Kilby.
Here.
Fish is absent. Joe.
Here.
Tommy.
Here.
Leighton.
Here.
Kramer.
Here.
Hortenson.
Here.
Rachels.
Here.
Thank you. The first item kind of on the agenda was to just cover a little bit about, some of the goals and kind of review the agenda. Firstly, would like to say good morning and thank you for those that are attending. Just want to obviously, respond a little bit to obviously the press release of Greater Fergus Falls. This is kind of from my perspective. I first became involved in the activities in the city of economic development when it was in-house and it was a subsection of the city. And at that time, and that was probably at least, probably 9 to 10 years ago. And due to the statutory limits, we could only fund the organization to the tune of $50,000. So that meant that staff that was employed by the old EIC, which initially when I at first became involved was Harold Stanilowski and then went on to be Amy Baldwin, we could only do that to the tune of $50,000 without that staff member becoming an employee of the city. And that happened, but we were also struggling at that time with overall direction. And a number of residents, as well as elected officials, went to Bemidji to meet with both Greater Bemidji and the city mayor and some council members. And at that time, it was felt the model would be beneficial in creating a new and more dynamic approach. The organization would be outside of the city proper, and that would allow, obviously, for greater confidentiality for any prospective entrepreneurs, investors, or new businesses. Once the organization was formed, Bruce Thorne was the initial executive director, and many of you have probably heard that name. He was involved in a lot of economic development, Project 500, worked, in part for Otter Power as well. And then that was followed by Andy Deckert, and then Natalia Bowman, and subsequently Ryan Tunsworth and Lance Anderson, both in a position of temporary and short-term director. Ultimately, the organization has struggled to maintain a strong leader, ultimately having 5 directors in 6 years. And Natalia left in May, June of 23, and administration assistant followed early 24. Since then, the board has been trying to fill the void, and as we all know, attracting quality employees is not easy, and Greater Fergus Falls, like many organizations, has struggled to replace that leadership position with a permanent qualified person. I don't know the exact budget of Greater Fergus Falls, but I estimate it to be around $300,000 to $400,000 per year. The city contributes $50,000, which is somewhere between 12 and 17%. So they have an equally reliable, heavy on other sources of funding other than just the city. Equally, it's my understanding that the county has not ever contributed to Greater Fergus Falls, despite having representation on the board. And apart from, equally the city residents do fund the CDA of the county. The consensus of the council is that without any employees within the organization, how do they intend to function? The city over time has been more than generous supporter of the organization, helping with the initial seed money to get the organization operational. Greater Fergus Falls did come to the city last year with a proposal of an additional funding representing approximately $48,000 plus commissions on land sales, and this was not approved by the past council, as opposed to the rhetoric that's saying that the present council is part of the problem. The city is pro-economic development and would definitely like to see more activity, but the progress has been difficult and slow, so bringing any substantial items to town. We've seen reuse of the old Sunmark building, which is fantastic, and has added some substantial growth to that area. I believe we need a common vision on how we pursue development. Over the course of the next few weeks, we can help shape and define the course we take with input from multiple sources. This coming week, which is today, We have both the West Fargo Director of Economic Development and the Minnesota Small Business Loan Programs coming to open up our meeting to educate and enlighten on the possible paths forward. Equally, we've reached out to Greater Fergus Falls on how we can transition, obviously, any of the pending inquiries. So I think one of the things that we need to do today and over the next couple of sessions that we have is, how do we create that vision and establish the roles? Ultimately, how are we going to fund economic development? What the structure and shape of that department or program would be. How do we attract new businesses? What zoning, regulations do we have and how do we implement them? And then look at what special incentives that we can have to attract those businesses. As we pave the way forward for new economic development, in the end, it would be nice to come up with, some conclusions and solutions. And so, not necessarily today, but hopefully on the 26th, we can answer some of those questions and we can come up with the strategy, the vision, and the business plan of how we wish to go forward. So those are just some opening kind of remarks. I think it should be a good session. Obviously, today we will have West Fargo obviously join us by Zoom, and then we will have obviously the Minnesota SBA in person. The goal is to listen to them and then ask them questions. They're here to be asked questions of, and no question is there's no stupid question. We're all ignorant in certain aspects of life. So if we ask the questions, we'll get the answers. And even if you think it's one, somebody else is probably thinking the same thing. So I encourage you to ask questions. Obviously, this is not a business meeting, so therefore there will be no actions taken out of this today. It is a forum for discussion, and hopefully we can enjoy the morning and learn something about what's happening in other communities and how the programs they have work, and hopefully glean some positive things out of it. With that, does anybody else have anything to add? Casey, I think, is joining us around 10 to 15 past the hour.
Just, Your Honor, I just want, for Greater Fergus Falls, I think their budget's just under 200,000,
Right.
295, I think is what it is, so.
Right. Thank you. I wasn't privy to that. So, anybody got anything else? Anybody got anything they would like to add of what they would like to see out of the next couple of sessions that we're going to have?
Yeah, Your Honor, I appreciate the comments that you made this morning. I think they're very accurate to the history and the makeup of Greater Fergus Falls, and like you say, you've been with it from the very start. I think one of the things that I'd like the community to know is that Greater Fergus Falls is a 501c3. They're their own entity, and they were not a connection to the city. So they made their own decisions in what they do as far as board members and as far as their fundraising and different things like that. And the thing that I would like to see going forward is I very much want them to stay active. I very much want them to be part of this economic development in the role of where they've done business development, help with the small businesses, kind of an incubator, some of the coursework that individuals have done to make these small businesses succeed. Because I think it's very much a part of something maybe that we will not be able to encompass with everything that we're looking at doing in the city. And so I encourage Greater Fergus Falls to look at what the future is for our community. I encourage the board members to look at kind of where they're at, and I would encourage, if they cannot take up the realm as Greater Fergus Falls, that we find another path forward of someone else that can. And so I want the community to know that I don't think this council wanted them to fail or shut down or disband like they chose to do. I think we would like them to be part of the discussion. So that's what I was going to say. The other thing is, when we introduce Casey Sanders Berglund here today, This is someone that has been very open, very cordial, very much wanting to put us as part of a connection with that Fargo-Moorhead area. And I think this might be a direction that Fergus Falls maybe hasn't done that much. And so I encourage the council today to ask some very tough questions of her, but know that she's stepped out quite a ways to come and help us today. And I think it's going to be a good morning.
Thank you.
And it's correct that she'll be here on the 26th, correct, I believe?
I'll just say one thing. Greater Fergus Falls wants to stay in business, but with the communications that's come back from this council, present council, that they're not willing to fund it, and we never voted on it, we never did anything like that. So they're sitting waiting back to see what we want as a role for them. And of course, when funding doesn't want to come back from the city, the other contributors, or whatever you want to call it, sponsors, or how you want to say it, kind of backed off also. So if we support them and want them to be still in the same role, but give them a vision, they're willing to go. That's why they didn't dissolve. They're not dissolved. They're just sitting back, taking a break and taking a look at what's going on. So the foundry lease doesn't go up until, I think, the 1st of July, I believe. And so that's not going to go away right now, but it's just to sit back and see what the council wants them to do. That's what they're waiting for. It's not that they're sitting there pouting, and they just want to know what direction, because they need the money to start collecting other money. So that's kind of where that's at. And I visited with Miss, I don't know if she calls Sanders or Berg or whatever. Very nice gal, very good gal, very educated gal. And I think she's going to bring a lot to the table for us, good education. So
Thank you, Scott, for those ones. Anybody got anything else?
I just think it's a great opportunity to have her speak today, and then also on the 26th. You know, she's kind of a proven deal there up in West Fargo, and that's something that we need to look at, something that's been proven. And, you know, I understand, Scott, that, you know, as far as funding from the city, but also, too, the city has to look at what's going to work and use all these different tools in the toolbox, if so to speak. You know, I know that there was a little opposition as far as maybe branching out with different things, but you know, that's what we need to do. I honestly feel that to succeed here, we need some wins. So thank you.
And just one more thing, if over the last 20 years of EIC, whatever you want to call it, economic development, the city, us, and I'm not saying us here, but
Yep.
the council has never give a vision or direction. And so we can push back on everybody who's, you know, kind of failed and walked away or whatever. Nobody's going to succeed unless there's a vision of what we, the council, want. And so you talked about that in your opening statement, Anthony, and it's really good to talk about that. And that's the concentration point, I think it is. And if we can work Greater Fergus Falls into it, that's great. If not, that's fine too, whatever it is. But
I
this
think
vision
that's
is a huge
key.
thing. Huh?
I think that's key.
It's 100%
I
key.
think
And you're here.
I think that was also, you know, one of the issues of the old EIC,
Right.
that there was never a direction as such. It was just like, let's employ somebody and, you know, wind them up, send them out there and say, do your best.
And we'll hear from Casey today.
And we didn't have a lot of necessarily sustainable support on how we want it to happen.
So,
Just
Quick
about Casey, she said the vision was the hugest thing when we were talking about it. And it was a struggle for their West Fargo council to get that vision. So it's not something that's going to come easy.
So talking about vision, but we've had that conversation with Dan and Lisa about the vision. Isn't that where they would come into this piece of it? To help us
Facility.
gather that vision of what we're looking for so that we can then execute or, you know, have somebody execute.
And I think they would be more than willing and prepared to do that, but I think they want to see what the general consensus is, to kind of if there are some foundation blocks of where the council sees that going, that they can then build off to go forward, before they kind of make a proposal on doing that.
Okay.
just one housekeeping thing. At 8 o'clock, a couple of council members have some calls to make, so we'll take a 5-minute break at 8 o'clock. And I know some staff also have some commitments at 8 o'clock that they also need to leave for.
Mine's canceled.
Oh, right. So.
Thank you, Anthony. I didn't ask for it, but I'm really happy I can make some calls at 8 o'clock. That's very good.
Yep. So, well, we're here to accommodate.
That's great.
As much as we can. Even for you, Scott.
Yeah, well, I'm just, like I say, I didn't, I've been going through my mind how to answer these questions at 8 or 8:30 or whatever, but it'll be great. Thank you.
Look,
I know I also wanted to ask for it, and that's, so.
then we can. So somebody has to entertain. Who's a good singer? Ryan.
Your Honor, I don't want to yin-yang everybody here, but there's two sides of the coin. I think the new wave of economic development is in the middle of being re-envisioned. Scott, you mentioned about a vision from the city. I don't think it's the city's vision to direct economic development. It's a combined effort. And what we're hearing now is that combined effort, rather than, let's name a few entities, I won't have them all, but the city, the county, the chamber, Greater Fergus Falls, whomever you want to call it, biggest Fergus Falls, the schools, the college. All these people have to come together with a focus. And I'm sorry I missed our local industries and business people. If it's not focused, everybody's going in their own direction. And even if the city had a vision, it's not going to work. It's got to be a community vision. And I attended the North Dakota Economic Summit, and basically what we've said here at a bigger schedule or scale, North Dakota's having the same issues. Labor, education, childcare, importing money versus just trading dollars. So this is a huge metamorphosis that we're going through because of the economic times today. These are some of the toughest times, and Mike and I have had long conversations about this. We want economic development. We need to focus on economic development, but let's be realistic. These are tough times. Walgreens is going out of business. They just sold to an investment group. Auto sales are off. Home sales are down. Inflation's 4%. Your earnings are only up 1%. This can't continue. So we got some headwinds. I think it's a good time to reevaluate where we're at and not have such big expectations, because this is going to be a long trail here until we get a national and worldwide economy straightened out. Our government can't spend ourselves into prosperity, and we've learned that.
I think that's right. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the session with Dan and Lisa, was that, we have to engage more than just a singular kind of group that says this is the direction we want to go, that we do. I think one of the things they brought up was, that engaging, as you say, industry partners in the city, retail partners like the chamber and the public, the residents of Fergus Falls, as to what do they see, because, everybody has a different vision about what to them is economic development. Economic development for me would be building something big with lots of pipes and lots of steam, but economic development for somebody else, could be, a retail box store. So it's a mix of everything.
Yeah, and Mike and I have talked about this too. Economic development is, however you want to define it, we can't just focus on a big box coming or these large smokestacks. We have to not forget.
They're not smoke.
Well, that's what they say. We can't forget whom we have. We have to help our local people stay in business. I don't care if it's a larger manufacturer, a car dealership, or a mom and pop shop. So those have to be as focused as well. And yes, The steam coming out of the smokestack's cleaner than the air we're breathing in. I know that.
I think, Your Honor, one thing too is funding. Not so much with who's going to work for this group now. It's how to fill gaps with businesses coming to town. I know that there's different areas that happen. In Fargo, for instance, they sweetened the pot. Fargo took Amazon, I think, away from West Fargo, and because they sweetened the pot up a lot better, did a lot more things for them. And that's where we have to figure out how much money we're going to put into that pot money to sweeten pots to get people, and that's a huge thing, and it's taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. And so it's just interesting to look at that. And Mark, you're right, exactly right. The changing dynamics of this whole thing is going. It's a whole different circle. But I think what can we do to attract people, and what we can do to make them come here, and what we want to give to them.
I think the other piece is that whatever we do has to be sustainable.
Right, exactly.
And I think, in fairness to, like the director of Greater Fergus Falls, half of their function was raising money for their, to sustain themselves. So they're not focused on economic development. They're focused 50% of their time on raising money. So I think we have Casey that's joined us, and I believe Mike, Councilmember Mike, was going to make an introduction. So
Hi there,
we only have Casey for 30 minutes. So.
Hi there, Casey. Can you hear us today?
I can. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what the deal was there, but glad to be here.
No, I tell you what, we appreciate it. I want to just take a second to introduce you to the council and to the individuals that are here today. This is Casey Sanders Berglund. She's the Economic Development Director in West Fargo. She's done a great job up there. Prior to that, she was involved in the Fargo-Moorhead, I think, Chamber of Commerce and different things. So she's been around economic development for a while. One of the great things about Casey is that she's willing to come here today to give us some insight of how West Fargo functions. And I think all of us know that West Fargo is, I think your motto, Casey, is the city on the grow. Is that correct at one
Sure
time?
is, yep.
So we're very happy to have her here today. Again, she is here just assisting us in kind of giving the framework of what she does and what she brings to the table for West Fargo, and seeing if this is something that we can take some pieces of this for Fergus Falls. So Casey, we're going to let you take it away, and we appreciate you being here today.
Great. Well, I think I'll kick things off by just sharing that my department is a team of one currently. So it is just me on my team. But kind of to set a little bit of the organizational chart and my understanding of why the city of West Fargo decided to have a position like this. So first and foremost, we have our city administrator, and then we have 5 senior directors. I report to our senior director of community development, and so under his purview, he also has engineering, planning, and I believe a handful of admin staff like communications, and then of course economic development. So several years ago, the city decided that because we get support from the Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC, they at first felt like they didn't necessarily need economic development, but throughout time realized that the Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC, though their work is super valuable, their main focus and priority is primary sector businesses. And so even though they may assist somewhat in some other business development or support, that is their bread and butter, is primary sector businesses, and they're going to focus on that new wealth creation. So if you fast forward a little bit to today, my focus then can also be supporting those primary sector businesses and having subject matter experts in those things that I can reach out to the Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC for additional, more highly specified expertise on what that looks like at the state level, or opportunities for the state to come in and play. But I also look at the entire fabric and pulse of West Fargo, knowing that we are a more bedroom community. If you look at property tax, which I often do, our commercial sector makes up for about 30% of our property tax, and our residential sector makes up for 70%. So we look at everything from your small business to a little bit of entrepreneurial things, but for the most part, we're looking. My day to day may be a business that is one or two people, or a smaller gross revenue, all the way to a Marvin Windows or Costco. So that's something I really enjoy about the work that I do, and that I can bring value to businesses, small or large. So that's part of the reason why the city of West Fargo wanted a role like this, so that we were not primarily or only focused on primary sector work. How my position is kind of or aligned is that I, of course, have my staff supervisor, but I also say that I have 5 bosses, because I make particularly no specific decisions, but offer facts, precedent, and policy, as well as some influence to our 5 city commissioners, which in the end are our deciding factor, or deciding votes. So in the meantime, I have a committee. My committee is the Economic Development Advisory Board. Now, that board is made up of 9 individuals that are specific industries within West Fargo. Again, I've seen this done many different ways. I believe Fargo, and don't quote me on this, but I believe Fargo, they specifically have more finance individuals on their voting roster besides their ex officios. And then I have 2 commissioners that are welcome to join me at any time, but hold economic development in their portfolio, but don't actually have a vote on the advisory committee. Every incentive goes to my advisory committee, or any large decision, whether it might be bylaws, or how we should do an economic development sales tax spend, as well as maybe larger requests from developers, things like that, letters of intent. All of those things flow through that advisory committee, and ultimately it's a recommendation to the city commission, who has the final vote and say. And so that's a little bit of the framework. If I were to give you kind of a sneak peek into kind of the 5 kind of pillars that shape my work, I would say it's around my departmental activities. Of course, it costs money to run a department such as this. The other piece would be a long range plan. Economic development, of course, and that's more traditional economic development, whether that might be what I have here at 8 o'clock, working with site selectors, soil remediation, asbestos abatement, those types of more core economic development work. Community development. So I'm not naive enough to think that, though my title is economic development, some of the work that I do, because of the nature and the size of my community, ends up being correlated with community development. An example of that would be the support that we give to our West Fargo events, which does our community's parade and just community gathering events like bike rodeos, things like that. So we support some of those things. We support some of the holiday activities. We also support some small business, or what I would call space activator events, that may bring people outside of West Fargo into our community, and then create what would be the last pillar, is economic activity. And so there are certainly things that I do that don't necessarily draw economic development, which is true development and creation of new wealth, but would create economic activity, which would be like the spend and local turn of dollars, which for our community is also important. And so an example of that would be, we have in our downtown mixed use zone, we have an enterprise grant, and that enterprise grant goes to fit up spaces. And typically we don't require but encourage our awarded businesses to use local businesses to do those fit ups. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a framework. Now, within each one of those pillars, there are specific goals, and within the three, there's guidelines around incentive strategy and policy. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a framework, and I'd love to open it up for questions. If anyone has specific questions, I'm sure that there's something that I missed. I'd be happy to delve in a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Casey. Could you just I only got 4 of the pillars, so I wonder if you could kind of just give the headline of each pillar.
Sure, no problem.
I was a little slow this morning.
Not a problem. So first and foremost, economic development, community development, economic activity, long-range plan, and lastly, just departmental activities.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And so the city of West Fargo has a revenue stream, which we have a sales tax that's collected for economic development. And so we are able to put that into play. And so when I look at long range planning, part of that, or the majority of the aspects of that plan, are around we don't want to overtax our residents, right? We don't want to do that, but we do want to have some funds in the reserve for when we have large projects that come our way, and if we can have some skin in the game through a financial resource, we want to make sure that we have that opportunity. But what that looks like may be of value to different entities and different commissioners at a different time, and so having a plan in place truly is a valuable resource.
Thank you for being here today. A couple of questions. We've had a lot of hot topic issues around TIF in the past in Fergus Falls. How does West Fargo use TIF? Where do you see it appropriate to use? Where has it been helpful to you? Where do the West Fargo commissioners not use TIF? Can you speak a little bit to how you guys use TIF?
Sure, I sure can. So for the city of West Fargo, it has obviously been different in the past. However, how I have used TIF in the last 3 years that I've been with West Fargo, I can really speak to that. And I know some historical context, but I'd say right now what we are really looking at is TIF is used primarily to support infrastructure that would surround the kind of the but-for test. So but for this TIF, or but for this infrastructure, this development likely would not happen. Typically, we also require a feasibility study to be completed. And so that feasibility study would show us how much funds it would cost to develop the infrastructure. Now, in North Dakota, we of course have special assessments. So I can give you an example. We had an industrial park that for many, many years, there was many variables in which it did not develop. There was a handful of homes on the land. There was some wetland delineation that needed to happen, and a couple of areas where there needed to be soil remediation. And so there was just a handful of reasons why developers purchased that land and then decided to walk away multiple years in a row. And so we knew that bringing a TIF in, we would be comfortable using that for the infrastructure needed, but we would not be comfortable using it to buy out homes that residents were still living in that we wanted the developer to incur the costs on. So by and large, what I've seen TIF used for in West Fargo is the infrastructure development. What that does is allows for the development to take place with no new specials being put on those properties, and that property tax still being incurred by the property owner and paying down those specials in the interim.
Can I make a follow-up? Are you using it just for commercial development or residential as well, like apartment buildings and things like that?
Sure. I'm not as familiar with using it as for residential. I know it's legal and that we do it. We have primarily used a pilot for apartment buildings, more specifically low-income senior housing. We'll use there's a specific low-income senior, essentially tax credit through a pilot that I would use for something like that. But we have not traditionally used a TIF for apartments. The only way I could see that being tied is if the city had a very specific goal around, say, like workforce housing. That's how we would potentially tie that. I have seen that used in Fargo for things like maybe not a specific apartment complex in my time frame, but something similar, like a multi-use facility, I believe it was.
Casey, I appreciate it. I want to come back to your funding source. You've got a sales tax that West Fargo brings in to put money in the coffers. And can you talk about how unusual that is, how that came about, and if that is very important to you or not, which I imagine it is, without that funding source or without some revenue coming into you, West Fargo, how much more difficult would economic development be for you or not?
Yeah, I can tell you my counterparts when I meet. I'm part of the Economic Development Association from North Dakota. They're always very jealous. They call it my war chest, which, of course, is something that I appreciate having. The sales tax was started in West Fargo in 2014, and I believe the intent is to have economic growth and job creation. And now that, of course, accumulates over time, we have a revenue of around $4 million a year. Now that covers my entire department. So when I talk about that pillar of department activities, that is how my department is covered. Now that includes salary, benefits, the technology, things that I need in order to operate, right? So I think that's really important for myself or for my entire team as well. But I also lean into the fact that I know a lot of EDCs, they have to go out and fund for themselves. That's not something I'm focused on. So when I'm going out to do a business retention expansion conversation, there's not going to be a follow-up of, and will you invest in that in the West Fargo's economic development, or will you invest in that? I do offer a shameless plug to invest in other community supporting activities, of course, but I don't have a direct ask, which is something that I appreciate in my line of work. Other than that, what it really does is gives me a strategic advantage. So again, I rely a lot on examples. And so there has been a handful of times in which, the most recent, I had a steel company that was they looked in Minnesota, they looked in Wisconsin, they also dabbled with the idea of looking at Montana. But in the end, what the economic development sales tax was able to do for this organization is kind of close a gap. So oftentimes businesses will reach out and they have funding, and that funding will come as as capital investment through their banking. We have some opportunities through the Bank of North Dakota, which is, from what I understand, the only state-owned bank, but that they can get an interest buy down. But part of the requirement for that interest buy down is to have community support or community match of up to 25%. And so that helps me in North Dakota, but it also helps me in West Fargo kind of put that closing. It's almost like a closing deal. So in this particular case, we were able to offer a forgivable loan of up to $275,000 with some clawbacks depending on what the first year or two looks like. We don't just want to give out money without having some specifics tied to that, and make sure we get what West Fargo needs so that that business aligns with our goals. Now, I can take that and I can be somewhat creative. Again, it's to support economic growth and job creation. So I could potentially, there's a road that needs to be fixed. I could pay a portion of that. Potentially there is a job that's coming a business that's coming, and maybe they're going to offer 300 jobs, but I'm going to source that to make sure that those jobs are a livable, comparable, and competitive wage. I don't want to incentivize a business that's going to come that offers, maybe 10% of the wages are competitive. I want to make sure that we're using that in those funds, those economic development sales tax funds, to bring jobs in that are going to be competitive.
Your Honor, question?
Sure.
A follow-up question on the funding. Recognizing North Dakota has an advantageous situation compared to Minnesota, what federal sources do you go after, grants, things like that, that we would have access to that would be more comparable, something that we could bring to the table? Or are there
Sure.
any?
Yeah, I don't use any federal funding unless it'd be a specific grant for economic development. We have gotten a couple of grants, but those were before my time, so I just worked on some of the maintenance stages of those things. So there hasn't been any federal funding. As far as the economic development sales tax piece, that was something that was voted in by our citizens, so that's just a local control. So that's certainly something you could look into. I know West Fargo, we also have a public safety sales tax, and that goes to pay for police and fire specifically.
Do any other of the communities like Fargo or South Fargo do any of those things in terms of the sales taxes for? 'Cause I know on fire chief would like a new red truck.
I bet, yeah. So the city of Fargo just enacted a public safety sales tax for their police and fire. They also just added 3% to their hotel lodging tax. Now, the hotel and lodging tax will sunset, but it will specifically go to building a new convention center in Fargo, where they will do a RFP and select the best convention center based on that. But they will now have the funding available.
Questions of Casey? Scott? Mark?
Thank you for being here this morning. What is the definition, or what do you use, the difference between economic development and community development?
Sure. So community development would be more of the things that are for bringing and activating spaces with people, and kind of, sometimes I like to use the words combating loneliness, and convening people, bringing people together. So community development might look like we support a 501c3 called West Fargo Events. And West Fargo Events is charged with, and we also have an agreement directly with them in which they need to provide 24 community-centric events. So those things are going to be, they host a full week called West Fest for us. So not that the city's not involved in supporting that, but we don't have the staff or capacity to put on an event really well. So they're going to host, I believe it's 24 events a year, namely like our parade. They do a couple of bike rodeos every Thursday throughout the summer. They host a cruise night, and I believe that hosts about 5,000 people every Thursday. And so we're convening around 5,000 people into a community area. And then we hope that from that community development, people are getting to know others. It's bolstering pride in our community. It's giving a family-friendly activity to do. But then in addition, it's going to potentially drive economic activity as well.
Thank you.
Casey, you and I haven't talked a lot about an entity that we have here in Fergus Falls called Greater Fergus Falls. We haven't talked a lot about that, but can you tell us a little bit about what your role as far as kind of what you're looking for the city and what some of these outside 501c3s you have? I don't know if you have one there in West Fargo, but what would be some of the weaknesses that a director within the city could not do that maybe a Greater Fergus Falls could do for us? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot with that, but just your thoughts.
Yeah, so I do lean on what I would call business partnerships or business partner solutions. I am not a small business advisory center. I am not an entrepreneurial center. If you don't have, say, a business plan or a plan to get funding, I am going to connect you with those other business partner solutions. In addition, what I would say our Greater Fargo Moorhead EDC provides is they're going to provide a much more holistic approach. When I talk about primary sector businesses, I understand in Minnesota there's a different term. I don't recall what that term is, but essentially a primary sector business in North Dakota is any business that creates new wealth from other communities, or other states rather. So they're going to bring in dollars from multiple other states, and so their primary focus is that. Now there's a lot of paperwork and specificity that goes on when when those types of businesses are coming to North Dakota or expanding in North Dakota. And so in that regard, I lean in on their subject matter expertise when it comes to those businesses. And then I can stay focused on what I do best and building that relationship. A lot of what I do is relationship building. But part of that is having a relationship with those partnership solutions. So I oftentimes send them over. We also have a North Dakota Women's Business Center that will also look at, say, like a business plan of sorts. But I'm not going to help you set up your business, right? Whereas there are EDC centers that oftentimes do things like that.
Your Honor. How are cold calls into West Fargo handled? How do they go to you? Do they go to some other department? And then how much of your job is going out and finding leads versus the ones that land on your desk?
Well, that's a great question. So I have set goals for my department. So I guess myself, but my goal is to hit 96 to 100 businesses within West Fargo to have those conversations around what's keeping you up at night. If you were to expand in West Fargo, or if you were to expand, would you choose West Fargo? Why or why not? Kind of learning the good, bad, and ugly about what businesses appreciate about being in West Fargo, what they don't, finding out if there's anything I can do about that. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. As far as cold calls coming into the city, they do all get directed to myself. Sometimes they land in the wrong department, but eventually find their way to me. Usually they might end up in planning or sometimes in assessing for some reason, but they'll make their way to me. I'm a little bit old school. I prefer to make time to meet with those businesses individually, in person if possible, and just kind of hear out what they're trying to do, see if there's any solutions. So I'm always vetting sites. I'm always looking at buildings that are already built and talking with commercial realtors. I'm always kind of trying to keep my pulse on those things. But I also keep a list of all of those people so that if I do have a business that comes and says, here's the 5 things I need, here's my other 5 wants, I can send it out and say, does anyone have anything like this, to try and make that match. In addition, I also do my own cold calling for businesses that I believe would be a good fit in the city. So I aim to, I try to target at least 5 potentials or prospects for each month.
Casey, can you tell us a little bit of the benefit of those calls coming in to you instead of just going to someone else? Why you guys do that in West Fargo?
I think it's around relationship building. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is I want to be able to, I often tell people that I work with, I'm going to kind of hold your hand through this process and talk about what that timeline looks like. And I'm going to be candid and honest from the very beginning through the end of the process, whether that is you coming to West Fargo or we don't find a spot, and just making sure that I'm honest and I'm not leading someone on. And, I find that having some of that connection right away helps build that relationship. However, I will say there is obviously times in which I have to bring planning and zoning in, or I may have to bring in engineering, because we're talking about access, we're talking about zoning, things like that, and I'm going to have to bring them into the conversation. But typically, I'm going to walk through all of those parts with them.
What are the advantages to you being a city employee versus, do you see advantages, disadvantages versus that, or working for an independent economic development group that maybe was partially funded by the city? How do you see that weighing out from your experience?
Sure. I guess probably the most critical advantage is that I, or the entity that I work for, we're not going out and asking for those funds. We're not soliciting for investors or donors. And so I can say, from my past experience working for the chamber, I often had similar business meetings with, key stakeholders. And oftentimes you could tell that they are waiting for the question of, like, how much are you going to invest today? Or at some point, we'll be coming back to ask you to participate and have some kind of skin in the game in the community. In my role at the city, because I am funded through those things, I'm not asking those questions, and I'm not, asking for an investment or a partnership in that regard. And so I'd say that's probably the biggest advantage. The kind of maybe the other disadvantage is maybe when I call, they're like, oh my gosh, have I done something wrong? Right? The city's calling me. I hope I'm not, quote unquote, in trouble or something like that. And so maybe it's a reason they answer the call, or a reason they pick up or call me back. But a lot of times it's a relief when I'm saying, no, I actually want to call to see if there's any way that I can assist you. And so it is kind of a unique and different role, I'd say. But throughout my counterparts throughout North Dakota, they, I think, find similar advantages.
Casey, how much time do you spend, and it sounds like you're busy, and to spend on searching out or making calls out to different people coming to town to see if they're coming to town, like before the Costco's came or whatever like that? Do you think do you make any calls like that, or you just don't have time to do that because there's so many people coming up to you already? That's my question is.
No, I try to balance that out. That's a great question. There are some months that I spend a more significant time doing that because I can be more proactive, and then there's other months where I have to be more reactive because I am getting those calls coming in. But I do spend, I'd say if I had to balance it out, I'd probably spend about 5 hours a month specifically curating and calling and creating those leads that eventually some of those turn over and become interested applicants.
Thank you.
Your Honor, can I ask a follow-up on that? Do you track, obviously internally you track your leads and the contacts you had. Do you share that then with your committee so they have a sense of what's on, or is it held pretty tight from privacy reasons and confidentiality reasons? What are you able to share with your committee so they, not necessarily for your accountability, so they know kind of what's out there and what directions you're going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I share more of that information internally with just like my lead supervisor, just so that he can kind of see what my plan of work looks like. Typically, we don't get in the nitty gritty of like, who are those leads? What does that look like? Unless I need his support on something. But with my committee, we primarily focus on where are you at? Or if your goal by this time in the month is to have 12 leads in the bucket. Do you have 12? Do you have 9? What does that look like? And we just have a conversation about what that looks like. That might be because we've front loaded business retention conversation meetings, and maybe by this time we were going to have 40 of those, but we have 50 of those done. And so it's just a conversation about what that overall plan of work looks like. And I kind of look at that plan of work as truly it's a guide. And so it's a guide to help lead to the end goal. And we may not hit those exact numbers, but keeping those numbers at the forefront helps us stay on task and stay on target of guiding the kind of that accountability, measurability aspect. Some of those things, as I'm sure you can imagine, are challenging to measure because a lead could maybe never come to fruition. But you're kind of vetting those things and documenting them, and you do have to, in my opinion, document kind of those sources. So
Casey, so how engaged is your advisory board? I mean, do they just purely meet once a month and you kind of go over, obviously kind of what you're working on, what you've kind of accomplished, where you need help, and do they actually physically do anything to help you, or is it just purely a board that gives you direction?
Yeah, I would say on a high level, they are more reactive. And so they are going to be that recommending body if I have any incentives. So I will bring those applications to them. However, if I needed a specific request, they have been absolutely influential in stepping up. What I mean by that is when I say have a prospect or a lead coming in and they're ready to do a site visit and take a look at a specific area in town, I may ask a committee member to come to that meeting based on maybe they're an industry match, so that that business can hear from someone who's actually in that industry, whether they have questions about workforce or what it's like to do business in West Fargo or North Dakota. And so I'll actively use those committee members as a industry voice that I know they already are in tune with what I'm doing and how West Fargo operates.
Your Honor. How does your department budget work? Not your gap funding money or to help a business come in, but your actual departmental budget for your operations, what you need to do to wine and dine people, things like that.
Yeah, I actually don't have a budget for that. So I don't wine and dine people. If I go out for coffee or if I go to dinner with somebody or something like that, I pay for that out of pocket.
How often do you meet with the council, Casey? Is it monthly, bi-monthly, or once a year?
Oh, sure.
That's because
my advisory committee meets monthly.
Advisory committee is monthly, and then okay, thank you.
Yep.
What's that? Did that answer your question? No, that was the advisory committee monthly?
Well, it's advisory committee or the council. What do you? There's a different name. I think you call it council, don't you? Is that?
Oh, our city commission.
Commissions, yeah. How often do you meet with them?
I do not.
You do. Okay, thank you.
So I may meet with different commissioners that hold economic development as their portfolio on a one-on-one basis, or up to 2, so that we're not breaking any sort of public meeting requirements. Unless I'm going to have a specific special meeting that would be publicly notified.
Casey, I know we're getting close to 8 o'clock, and your time has been invaluable to us, and I know hopefully we'll get a chance to speak on the 26th more about how the city acquires land and how you look at land and what you do with land to have land available for businesses, which we've talked about, which will be, I think, intriguing to the council. I think the last thing I'd like to leave it with is tell us how you collaborate with other economic development individuals, or if you're just an island on your own out there, and maybe how Fergus Falls can be part of that picture with you, possibly, if we go forward with this.
Yeah, I can share that our Economic Development Association has been a wonderful network. Likely Minnesota has something similar, but I am continually meeting with other economic development directors or association members like myself. And if I have a lead that's just not quite right for West Fargo, I am going to, because we're always in communication, I'm going to kick it over to another organization or another city that I know may have some potential. My goal is I want to find a home for this business. And what I have found during that process is that I've created that relationship with them, even though I am not going to be the winner, like the city of West Fargo is not going to be the winner. I've created that relationship in which they will send others my way. Because they have then had the opportunity to learn about what that looks like for West Fargo. I'm sure you know business owners have conversations with other business owners and they want to do business with people they're comfortable with. And so that's my goal. We're always connecting businesses with other communities that would be a benefit, right? Or that we might know as rail access or the better water access or the power needs or different things like that that maybe we don't have in the right space or the right zoned area. But I guess I do have to step out. I have a meeting with the site selector here. But if you have anything specific or if any of you have specific questions, if someone wants to collect those and shoot them my way, I'd be happy to bring information or anything else about what I do or in the city's goals, those kinds of things when I join you on the 26th.
Right. Thank you, Casey. We look forward to seeing you on the 26th. Enlightening. So,
sounds great. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. We will take 5 minutes for a couple of people to make phone calls. So anyway, moving on, and I think that was obviously helpful. And so our next guest is Ian Karlstrom, who's the regional director from West Central SBDC, and I think Clara is going to just give a couple of words of introduction as to what Ian is and does.
Yeah, well, I'll let Ian speak for himself, but just from the city perspective, city staff and Greater Fergus Falls, we've been working with Ian for the last couple years on our entrepreneur initiative. So a lot of times when we get something coming into the city where they need help putting together a business plan or they're looking for different kinds of financing, SBDC has been an amazing resource for those people to be able to get up and running and be parts of business cohorts, etc. So I'm happy to introduce Ian and thank you for being here this morning and let us know what you are all about.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Sorry, you guys have to look at my backside there, but thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me today. I'm Ian. I'm the Regional Director for West Central SBDC. SBDC just stands for Small Business Development Centers. We use a lot of alphabet soup here, so feel free to ask questions if you have, or else save them for the end. In a nutshell, what we do is we support small business, both on the startup side and existing businesses. So if you are somebody who has a business idea just last night and you don't know what your first steps are, you can get a hold of us for all of those initial, business planning, market research, financial benchmarks, getting your finances together, getting ready to go to the bank for financing, all those things. And we also work with about half of our clients are existing businesses. So especially those first-time business owners in the first 0 to 3 years have a lot of questions, not knowing how to navigate just hiring their first employees, all those things. We do a lot of work with existing businesses who are growing, expanding, getting new pieces of equipment or second locations, new buildings, things like that throughout the life of their business. We even have folks on our team that are certified exit planning professionals. I'll share more about that, but that's just kind of a quick nutshell. All of our work is no cost to our clients and confidential. So I'll share more about how that works. A little bit of background about the SBDC. We have been around here in Minnesota since 1979. We were part of a pilot program. Obviously, that was before my time, but the story that I tell is that we did such a good job that the very next year in 1980, we were written into law by President Carter. So we're a child company of the SBA, if you will. If you called the SBA for assistance, they would just send you to us. So fast forward today, 45 years later, we have about 1,000 centers across the country, and we serve about 1 million entrepreneurs a year. And we've got a couple of brother and sister programs under the SBA as well. So if you've ever heard of the Women's Business Center, Veterans Business Outreach Centers, SCORE, or APEX, these are all entities just like us that offer free confidential consulting. You know, if you're a woman in business, if you're a veteran coming out of service wanting to start a business, if you want to do business with the government, all these types of things, we can help with that. As I mentioned, what do we do? Claire mentioned a couple like programs or cohorts. The vast majority of the work that we do is this one-on-one, confidential, behind closed doors kind of work. It's individualized, so we don't have a script. We really meet people where they're at and figure out what are their next steps. We're almost like a project manager for an entrepreneur. We don't get to do it for them, but what we call it is technical assistance, which means that we're not just cheerleaders. We're going to help them down that loan application line by line if that's what they need. As I mentioned, both startups and existing businesses. I wanted to highlight a couple of resources that we have that really, I think, add a lot of value to the entrepreneurs. We've got a couple of different tools and subscriptions for business planning. So if you want to write a business plan in Microsoft Word, that's great. But if you want to have a fill-in-the-blank kind of template that you can start with, we have those options. We've got a couple of resources that we pay for that we're able to offer out for free, market and industry data. So imagine a 30-page report on any industry you want that tells you everything from financial benchmarks to average wages to how these businesses are valued to how the business has recovered since the pandemic. Everything an entrepreneur really needs to know to get a big understanding about the industry that they're in. We've got financial benchmark tools because no two industries are the same when it comes to cost of goods or overhead or variable costs. So what is the average cost of goods? We don't have a crystal ball when it comes to putting the numbers together, but we can help entrepreneurs make really good guesses. And then our Proforma tool, we do a lot of work with bankers who get underprepared clients that walking in their door that want to start a business or want to get a loan. The banker will send them straight to us, and we kind of send them back fully ready, which means sometimes a 30-page financial packet that's got historicals and projections and amortization schedules and all the stuff that they need to be loan ready. We also have a business reference guide, which provides rules of thumb valuations for every industry. It's like a 2-inch thick book. Luckily, it's online now, but how do you value the business that you want to sell? And so this is just rules of thumbs that provide a ballpark. It's not a $10,000 valuation or anything like that, but it's really close. And for most entrepreneurs, this empowers them to build the value in their business that's transferable someday to sell. So if they want to sell it for $1 million, they know how to make that happen. We do have a couple of programs. I'll touch on them a little bit. Fast Track and Rural Edge specifically, and we'll talk about some of the AI stuff that we're doing as well. But I think another big part of the value that we bring is our team. We've got a team of 12 consultants, and they have professional development requirements. So that means they're out there getting certified, getting trained and stuff. They're not just out here winging it. They're actual qualified professionals that are working with the clients. I want to just give a little bit of a background of our story here. I was hired in the beginning of 2023, a little bit over 2 years ago, to take over this program. We moved the host from Concordia to M State College, so we have a campus here in town. My office is actually in Moorhead, but I get around all over the place. Our program had been beaten up pretty bad by the pandemic, which wasn't uncommon. SBDCs were at a breakneck pace. I was working in North Dakota SBDC through the pandemic, and I was hitting my annual goals every quarter. So we were just overwhelmed with clients, and Concordia decided to kind of move on from the program, so I was hired to move it over to M State. We grew our team from 7 consultants up to 13 to make sure we had a really dynamic and robust team. We focused on developing strategic partnerships. Claire alluded to, like Greater Fergus Falls. We're also working with Southern Valley Economic Development down in the WAP-Breck area, as well as Cultural Diversity Resources, Project 412. We really want to support our region, not just our clients. We became a Fast Track affiliate a little over a year ago to offer good programming that's accredited. This was a program developed by the Kaufman Foundation like 2 decades ago, so we know it works. We wanted to make sure our program was respectable and somewhere that was trusted by people like you and other stakeholders throughout our region. We've been very active over the past couple years, participating in over 40 different events, workshops, things like that. I certainly don't want to sit in my office in Moorhead and hide from our region. I've got some wonderful pictures of our team here, but the idea here is that I've been doing this work long enough to know that towns don't want to be served by the bigger town around them. You know, you guys don't want to be served by Moorhead. So our goal is to hire people that live, work, go to church here locally, so you know who they are and you can trust and rely on them. And not just those individuals, but those organizations, those entities like Greater Fergus Falls that are doing the great work. I want to brag for just a second. In the beginning of 24, we were recognized as one of the SBDCs with the most growth from 22 to 23, which I thought was obvious because we needed to get back up to snuff. But then later that year, I was recognized as America's 40 Under 40. I received that award in Atlanta, Georgia last year in September, and we're getting ready to announce the Center for Excellence Award that's being awarded to us by the SBA here in a few weeks. So we're really excited about where we are now today, and we have our foot on the gas. We're not slowing down. We really want to just be that go-to resource in the region. So more importantly than the awards itself is the work that we're doing, right? How did we get those awards? So I want to give you a snapshot of some of our metrics over the past 2 years. We've served over 720 unique clients from all throughout the region, not just in Moorhead or Fergus. We've provided over 6,000 hours of direct client assistance. Our 12 consultants are not full-time employees, they're all part-time, and they're about the equivalent of 2 full-time people. And then me and Amy are also full-time at the college, so we about have 4 full-time as our whole team. We've helped 11 businesses get bought or sold. We've helped start up 75 new businesses in the last 2 years. Those businesses have accessed over $26 million of capital. We ourselves do not have any money to give. It's helping them get capital from your local banks, from One Central Initiative, and other sources. We are supporting over 2,300 jobs at an average hourly rate of about $20 an hour. We have these numbers as an accredited program. We don't get to make these numbers up. These numbers are all signed off by our clients to say not only did they get those things, but that we substantively helped them with that. Here in Fergus Falls, specifically over the past 2 years, we've helped about 55 unique clients. 16 of them have transitioned over in the past couple of months from Greater Fergus Falls to SBDC as we've really established that partnership. Obviously that's changing now, but really dedicated. Beth Pridey is one of our contract consultants. She was also the consultant at Greater Fergus Falls. So that made that transition very easy to say, hey, if you're a client that needs help here in Fergus Falls, we got you. We provided over 1,500 hours of assistance to Fergus Falls clients here. We've helped 1 business get bought or sold and 5 new businesses started. With our support, those businesses have added 2 full-time jobs and 2 part-time jobs to the community. And over $2 million of capital has been accessed. I just wanted to share this as a quick snapshot. We've been in touch with Greater Fergus Falls for as long as I've been here. In the legacy days, in the height of it all, Greater Fergus Falls was paying about $22,000 a year for what we call direct provision of client services. So $22,000 a year was getting paid to the consultants to go do workshops and webinars and one-on-one work. Obviously, that's gone down a little bit just with visibility and access. But just as a benchmark in your mind about kind of when it's very active, that's about the volume of work that's happening here in town. I wanted to highlight a couple programs. I mentioned Fast Track. This is a Kaufman Foundation developed this curriculum about 2 decades ago. We are an affiliate, which means that if you sign up, if you're in our region, they'll point you to us to get this training. This is a very intensive program, 30 hours over the course of 3 months. This is meant to help entrepreneurs get from idea to launch in 3 months. It's designed to fit into a college curriculum, so it's like 13 weeks or so. It does great for 0 to 3 businesses, 0 to 3-year-old businesses, early phase. But what we found is that this is a big, heavy lift. 30 hours is a lot to commit to. And some of the feedback that we got from our stakeholders was like, this is great, but, we need to accelerate this a little bit. And digital marketing is great, but we need, local business champions, for example. So we are developing this program called Rural Edge. And when I say we, I mean us, our West Central team. This is a program specifically designed for West Central Minnesota. We're getting ready to launch cohorts in Q2 here very soon. And it's a 7-week program that has a sprinkle of entrepreneurship training in it, but is really more of an entrepreneur leadership program. Meant to get entrepreneurs out into the community, making the changes that they want to make in their community. And so when we get done with this program, they don't just leave with a shiny business plan, they leave with a local project to do that is of their own making. So it's really meant to get entrepreneurs active in their community as leaders. One other program that you've probably seen, especially here in town, is a women's program led by Beth. We Thrive, some funding that we got from the Minnesota Women's Foundation. We started out with this SIPS Skills and Solutions, which was meant to help them build their network, build the skills, and to help each other thrive in business. And then we pivoted to a pivot, no pun intended, pivot mastermind, which is based on this book. But the thing about these programs is they've been wildly successful, and anytime we wrap one up, the cohort makes their own Facebook group and keeps the momentum going. They keep meeting with each other monthly. They've been filling up before we can even market or promote them, and so you might not have seen a lot of that effort. We did get this funding again, so we're gonna be doing more of these cohorts. We really wanna just support all sorts of, we're inclusive, we are industry agnostic, so we're not all about women, but we really wanna include and be specific in the services that we offer. Another thing that we're doing is around AI. And the approach that we're taking is, the theme is 10 chats for 10 hats. As you know, entrepreneurs wear a lot of hats. Now, instead of wearing 10 hats, they can have 10 chats to help manage and pivot and keep everything under control. So we started out with this AI resource lab, which went live on our website in beginning of Q4 last year, which provides basic training and AI tools that they can experiment and play with. And we've done about 10 different sessions, including here in Fergus Falls, live demonstrations with Q&A. It's almost like a focus group for us to show and tell AI to entrepreneurs what it's capable of and how to use it, but also learn from them about where they're at so we can develop better training. As a result of that, we are getting ready to launch 2 twin AI conferences, one in Moorhead, one in Carleton, over by Duluth, in June. And it'll be a full day immersive AI experience really aimed at entrepreneurs, helping them use and leverage AI to just be better, smarter, faster. We're not trying to replace entrepreneurs. We're, cat's out of the bag, not my cat. We're just there to help support it. I wanted to share, just for the sake of time, I'll just share one success story. As I mentioned, we're industry agnostic. We don't just serve, downtown businesses, for example. One of the businesses that we were able to serve here in Fergus, who is allowing us to share their story, is Calvin. Calvin owns and operates Aziza's Residential Care. It's a home-based care business for adults with disabilities or elderly. He worked with us to, get everything opened and registered with the state and all that stuff. Before he knew it, all of his openings were full, so now he's already thinking about maybe a second location. And so these are the kinds of businesses that don't always get seen downtown. Another success story was a small town near Alexandria helping a years ago employee buy the grocery store that she used to work at when she was in high school. Those small town grocery stores are near and dear to every city council's heart. And helping see that ownership transition is a huge success. Or another one is a trucker's wife who was doing his bookkeeping for him and decided, hey, why don't I open a bookkeeping business for truckers since I know what I'm doing? So we helped her do that. These are the successes that are really fun to share, but we don't get a chance to share all of them just because of the confidentialities. So every client that signs off that says we can share it, then we do. My last thing I just wanted to share is, we're not just here to do the work ourselves. If I lift my gaze and look at the 9 counties that we serve, there's 82 communities, and there's a vast network of economic developers and entrepreneur support organizations. Our goal is not to compete with them. Our goal is to play nice in the sandbox and to really create a network that thrives, is dynamic and robust and connected. To my research, I believe our region is got about 13,000 small businesses in it, and that number has doubled in the past 40 years. So as it is today, our region is growing by about 260 new businesses a year, roughly. And I just want to make sure our program, as well as all the others, are as well connected to those folks as possible so they have the resources to thrive. So the way that our strategy around this, playing nice in the sandbox, is to engage, connect, and collaborate. We engage with all the EDAs through our advisory board. It's not a formal board by any means. It's more informal and inclusive, where it's like an open invite to join us, engage in the conversation, help us keep the finger on the pulse of those communities, let us know what's needed so we can be there when we're needed, and be out of the way when we're not. Nobody wants us twiddling our thumbs in a small town with a full-time person that's not quite needed. So we try to right-size our support, which is part of the reason that Rural Edge program came out was because of the feedback we got. From a connection standpoint, we were having our monthly meetings to, connect and educate our staff, our consultants, and we decided, why are we keeping this to ourselves? Why don't we open this up to the others in the region that are doing the great work so that they can be as well connected and as educated as we are? So now our monthly meeting is open to others who are doing this work so they can be connected to great resources. And then for those who are really serious about the work, maybe they're offering coaching or technical assistance too, we say, hey, let's work together. Maybe you need a better CRM. We're finding that a lot of them are doing this work in spreadsheets or on limited budgets. So we're extending our resources to really establish these strategic partnerships, whether they're like SBDC satellite centers or just dedicated efforts. We want to keep those efforts local. The way that we're funded, my last thing here is, as a government program, the SBA does give us funds every year. Those funds have to be matched dollar for dollar. And so I could go on a match fundraising strategy and ask you how, give me some money to match my problem. That's my problem, not yours. So instead, we're flipping the script and saying, hey, if you have $1 or $2 or 10 or 1,000 to put into supporting small businesses, we'll match that with our federal funds and come up with a strategy that fits your community so all that effort stays local. So we can either double the budget for the same work or cut the budget in half to make that right size for the community. And that's the call to action for you guys. I'm not here to make that ask, but if you allow me, I certainly will. But just know that we are dedicated to making sure that your investment stays local to support those businesses. That's really all I had. Thanks for hearing me out. I'll take any questions.
Any questions of Ian? Scott?
You mentioned that 12 consultants are all part-time. Is Ryan Tunkseth one of those here in town?
He is. He's been with our
I thought I
program for
recognized
3-4
the
years.
connection, and he had, I think he even offices out at the college here, or has a place that he can meet with people.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
What exactly the count is then that you cover? You said West Central?
The same footprint as West Central Initiative. So we've got Clay, Ottertail, Douglas Pope, Stevens, Traverse, Wilkin.
Pope and Doctor.
Those ones. I always say, from Moorhead, Fergus Falls, Detroit Lakes, and Alexandria, and everywhere in between.
Right. Right. Thank you. Any other questions of Ian?
Ian, I appreciate your time here today. The location out at M State, how often is it staffed, or is it just as needed?
That one's just as needed here in the Fergus Falls area.
How often does someone end up in there? Once a week, once a month?
Well, it might be changing now because we had been really leveraging that greater Fergus Falls space, but with that changing, I would expect that to be used at least once a month at this point.
Okay, good. Would, with Greater Fergus Falls as an entity deciding to disband and do what they're doing as a business, have they reached out, or can you assure us that all of their clients that had been working with you, or their clients in their hopper that they were assisting, are they under your umbrella now and getting taken care of, so we know that they're in good shape?
Yes, we started that transition in August last year, while their organization was still really intact, and we made that transition. And so, everyone that came in that door had access to our program, had the option to sign up. We didn't force them to, but that's been well known to be the avenue.
So we could say that those businesses aren't being left behind at this time. They're taken care of and still functioning, which is great. The other question I have is I like to usually know, how do we stack up with other communities? You're working in a lot of other counties, this and that. You said you help 16 business, maybe 2 new businesses, this or that. How do we stack up to the communities that are around us? Are they at 100 and helping, that many, or are they at 1? Where are we at with small business and how it's growing and how it's doing things in relation to our neighbors?
Great question. I recognize that I'm not fully prepared to answer that today, but what I will say is that no 2 communities are the same. And what I see from a Greater Fergus Falls standpoint is a pretty good amount of activity. I think it could be improved. One of the challenges with, having a strong downtown location, going back to the Natalia Bauman days, there was a lot of really hands-on, lots of workshops, lots of visibility. Those things matter. And so I think we have naturally seen a little bit of a decline, and maybe those clients have been rerouted and have found us kind of separately, I hope. But over the past year or so, there's been a little bit of a slowdown just from like a visibility and access standpoint, which we're trying to make sure that stays intact. But seeing 5 new businesses start up in the past 2 years and over $2 million of capital, I think those are all really strong things. And as you guys continue to build a strategy moving forward, we like to align our work to empower those entrepreneurs to row in that same direction. So whatever those city priorities are, those things really help create momentum.
Ian, I appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Familiar with the program since '79 myself. I imagine it's gone and developed quite well. You were talking about funding. Was there funding going from Greater Fergus Falls to you, and how much was it?
That's a great question. So that conversation was interrupted a couple times through just some of the leadership transitions that we saw. Most recently, what we had kind of agreed on was a cost share agreement where Beth was their consultant and coincidentally ours because she lives in Detroit Lakes. And so most recently, we had agreed to pay her at the same rate that they were paying her, and then they would just split that with us 50-50. And so I'd have to look at the actual number, what that would look like, but in the past, that was their 100% their, employee, so they would pay for it. But most recently, the agreement was that we would just split it 50-50, but that kind of just got lost with this most recent thing.
Your Honor, I would make a strong suggestion that the SBDC become part of an ongoing conversation with the council, be it quarterly, every 6 months. I think it's a great program. I've worked with it for many decades. It helps set young person start, and you're not even respecting the confidentiality. You're ghost. Nobody knows about what you're doing, and I think part of the new groove of economic development. I think we really strongly need to have your input and work with us and keep us informed. So, Ian, I really appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. Happy to do so.
I think hopefully some of that will come out of, the conclusions and solutions, so we don't get ahead of ourselves on, I think we need a comprehensive solution, not adding little bits to it as we go along. Any other questions of Ian? But I agree, I think SBA, as you say, is a ghost in the background that nobody knows does a lot of work.
I want you to become part of the mainstay. I'd like to have you on the mainstay versus a ghost, working under the table.
I'll be here anytime you need me.
I mean, do most of the banks in Fergus have is there any of those where we can help you kind of equally build relationships, or are you in pretty good shape from that point of view?
I hope we're in good shape. It's an ongoing strategy that we always try to stay in touch, at least annually, to have in-person visits, if not more regular.
Thank you. And maybe the other part, following up a little bit on what Mark was saying, is that, maybe Ian giving a similar presentation to the Business Development Fergus Falls loan program.
Yeah.
And, the city has it's got limited funds, but those funds are obviously, helpful to start entrepreneurs and businesses, not just entrepreneurs, but other people get that gap financing piece that sometimes they need.
Sure.
Any other questions of Ian? If not,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, well, we have obviously, we have 15 minutes of allocated time, but we do not have to kind of use that as such. But maybe, as a follow-up, if, to help prepare for the next meeting, if people have like specific topics, particularly, I think, Casey kind of reached out and said, if you've got a topic you would like me to talk about specifically, if we could get that information, obviously, to either myself or kind of Lynn, or Andrew, we could then forward that to Casey so that she comes better prepared to specifically talk about, whatever subject matter that is. It would make the meeting more efficient and helpful. And the other piece would be, is there anybody else that the council would also like to hear from, from an economic development perspective? Obviously, we were fortunate that Ian was able to make today to give a different perspective on the tools of economic development within our region. I believe the Chamber is, at the next meeting, will also give an update on a business survey that they recently conducted. So that will take obviously a few moments, but give a sense of what's happening or where Fergus Falls businesses sit at this point in time. Go on, Al.
I just want to make a comment too. It was nice to have the Casey present today and Ian present today, because it shows there's a couple. I mean, these are you're going for the same goal, but yet there's different ways of getting to this goal. There's a step process that maybe Casey doesn't do, but you're going to do it, and that's how we can move forward. I think it was an excellent presentation by both, and good questions that were asked. And I think, as the mayor had mentioned, if there's any questions that the council has to give to the city here, and they can forward that to Casey, so she can, really kind of have that question, and she can have that answer quickly, and then we can move even faster through this. So I think it's a great start. I think that hopefully the people of Fergus Falls are going to see that we're on this mission to look at all options and to move forward. So I appreciate all the presentations today. Thank you.
Scott?
And Anthony, I think probably the biggest thing in the room is funding. Where we're going to get our funding from and how we can do it in Minnesota. And I don't know if sales tax is the answer or what it is, but I'd like to have, talk about funding in the next meeting, take allocated time. And I don't know if Andrew can do a little research on how economic development could get funded through a sales tax if possible, or anything. I know Mike asked the question about putting it on the hotels, and I think he's going to come back and talk about that at the next council meeting, Andrew, is that? And so there's just different funding things that we can do legally in Minnesota and how it works. So that's kind of one of my biggest questions.
I think that's paramount as to getting, we're not going to get anybody to be an economic developer, employee without sustainable funding. And, that's key to finding the right person, that they don't have to worry about how they're going to get paid. Mike?
Well, I agree with Mr. Rachels, and I agree with you, Your Honor. Funding is the main part, and there's two real parts to this for the city to start to consider, and I'm talking the residents and the council. The one part is funding just the position, which has to be sustainable, and it has to grow, and it has to do this. But there's another component to it, that this economic development director has to have funds in the coffers to be able to support the development with certain businesses. When a business comes and, like she said, they negotiate or they try to do this, you cannot have an economic development person come to that podium every single time and ask the council for some money. It just will not work because this council, it'll change over time. That economic development person to be successful in this community has to have a generating source of revenue, just like a business has, so they can go out and do the things they need to do. Not saying that the council doesn't have oversight of that, but the past where a person comes and asks us for money is just not going to work in this situation at all.
I think I wholeheartedly agree. Mark?
Is the next retreat on the 26th just economic development? Or are you going to cross some other trails?
No. Economic development at this point in time.
Okay. The other items that I'd like to obviously discuss in meetings forward are, what we're going to do with the Big Wood Event Center, and there's a few budget items that should be addressed.
I think that's Big Wood is on the council agenda
Monday.
So
You requested that, I think, last meeting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry?
You requested that last meeting to be on the agenda for Monday, and that was,
Right.
Bill, could you bring us Visit Fergus Falls, the sales tax receipts? I haven't seen that for a while. Or is it on the website?
For Visit Fergus Falls? We don't put that on our website, the lodging tax. Yeah, I can certainly bring you an update.
I think Andrew's going to address that, so maybe we can encompass it with that.
Yeah. But what we collect a year is maybe around 160,000 a year is what the 3% is, I believe. But
Yeah.
we'll nail that down as we get the numbers finalized for 24. So.
Yep. And the sales tax is on the website?
Yes, that should, every time I send it out to the council,
Yep.
I need to send out the most recent. I just received it yesterday.
Thank
And
you.
for 2024, we collected about $1.6 million or 1.63 for 2024.
Beautiful.
I believe it was, but I'll get it out to you and we'll get it up on the website the most recent month, so.
Last thing,
One
Your
last
Honor.
comment?
Yeah, one last comment I want to say is I'm proud of this council and I'm proud of this mayor and what they've done in 70 days of this new council. We went from myself up here just asking a motion to see if we could look at some economic development thoughts to having great individuals in front of us today. So I feel very good about this council and the mayor and the direction that we're headed. And I think the community should feel good as well that we are as committed as I've ever seen going forward to make this community as great as we can from a business standpoint. And I think we're going to do it with every entity that we can in every single way. So I want to thank the council for kind of where they're going with this, and you as well, Mayor.
No, thank you. It's just part of life. So with that, we are adjourned, and we'll see. Oh, I mean, we could say there's a council meeting obviously on Monday evening. So for those that didn't know.